You are coming to us from New Jersey, yeah?
Yeah, I'm coming to you from
We are here
Princeton, New
from,
Jersey. I sort of
we are
split
here from
my
the Garden
time
State.
here in Princeton, and we've got a little log cabin up in the mountains in Pennsylvania on a creek. So, but I thought for Wi-Fi, internet, it would be better to do this here in Princeton than up in the mountains
Sure.
someplace.
Well, I've got some family in Oradell, New Jersey, just outside of Hackensack.
Okay.
You are still one of my favorite parts of the Garden State.
Yeah, it's a
Let's
lovely.
let's get started. All great writers are, of course, great readers as well. Where did the title come from? Even
Well,
so,
this is from Raymond Carver's poem called Late Fragment. And it goes, did you get what you wanted from this life? Even so, I did. And what did you want? To know myself beloved, to feel myself beloved upon this earth. And it's one of those poems that has just stuck with me over the years. I think it says pretty much everything about the human condition you could want it to. And it's called, as I say, Late Fragment, and it's what's on Carver's headstone on his grave. That's what he wanted to put there.
brilliant. If there are aspiring writers assembled this evening, one could do a whole lot worse than cribbing from Raymond Carver.
That's for sure.
Nicely done. And for those who have yet to dip into the book, Even So takes place in Jersey, in principally, I suppose, Princeton and Trenton. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What, class and geography are a big part of the book. Could you thumbnail Princeton and Trenton? What kind of towns are they?
Well, I don't think two towns could be more different. We are, I think, 9 miles apart. I mean, I always say, you can walk down the street and you're in Trenton. And I have to admit that sometimes in Princeton, which is a very leafy university town, obviously, Princeton University being here, very well-heeled, very privileged. The number of people who go between Trenton and Princeton are not that many. And I've spent a lot of time working in food pantries down there, and in the soup kitchen, in what they call the Trenton area soup kitchen. Great place. And I was surprised, when people I know would say to me, geez, I wouldn't go to Trenton. It's like, well, why not? It's like, I don't know. It makes me nervous to go into Trenton. And it's like, but it's right next door. I mean, you're not going to another country, but are you? And I think that's the question. Are you going to another country? When Trenton used to be a manufacturing hub, they have this sign on the Trenton Bridge, Trenton makes, America takes, I think it is. But there are no more factories there. There's very little industry there. And that, of course, happened after the Martin Luther King riots. Things pretty much just moved out of Trenton. And the city, as many cities do, imploded under the weight of its own poverty. So it's a town with issues. It's a town with problems, but it's also a town with an incredibly vibrant artistic community, perpetually struggling. But it's a place for which I have, a lot of affection. And I wish that there wasn't this incredible separation between the two towns, but there really is. And that's one of the things that made me so impressed by the people who run things like the soup kitchens and the church basement food pantries, and the places where people can get a meal and where they can get clothing. I have a friend, Eric Kausman. He's the pastor at a Lutheran church there. He did hard time. He spent a long time in jail, got out, ended up in the Princeton Seminary, became a minister, and now has a church in Trenton, doing unbelievable work. The kind of stuff he did during COVID to feed people is really second to none. And the same is true with a number of Catholic sisters that I've met who work there and in Camden. There's an amazing group who work out of Camden. And what's interesting to me is that it is in those sorts of groups that you find so little judgment. One of the things that's disturbed me, and I mean, I've lived in a lot of privileged communities in my life, I lived in Paris, for crying out loud, and I lived in the part of Paris where you had, 6 fireplaces in your apartment. So it was a pretty privileged view of Paris. And, and I've lived in Toronto and Montreal, and I have been incredibly poor. Lived on tang, cream of wheat, and sardines for 6 months, which I do think almost covers all the food groups. But I've also lived as a privileged person for, much of the last part of my life. And it distresses me when I see this idea of the other, which is, of course, something that I've talked about in all my novels. What happens when we view our neighbors as those people, as them, as the other. So I think that flows over into this book as well.
So let's open the book up a little. Angela Morrison is a wife and mother. She lives at a fine Princeton home. She doesn't sweat much for money. Her son Connor is getting into, Harvard, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
As did his father. She's doing rather well. Tell me about Sister Eileen and about Angela, the two principal characters, perhaps.
Right. Well, as you say, Angela is a woman who, for all outward impressions, should be just as happy as a clam, right? As you say, she's got this great house. She's got a very successful husband. She's got a son she adores. She has a greenhouse full of orchids for her to play in. She does good works. She volunteers hither and yon. And of course, that's part of where you see some of the cracks of her dissatisfaction. She wants to be more than she is. And she wants to live more of a passionate life than she's living. And in fact, early on, there's a conversation with a friend of hers, Dee Dee, where she talks about how there's no passion. And she's not merely talking about sexual passion, although that has partly to do with it, but it's a passion for engagement in a wider life that she doesn't feel that she has. And her friend says to her, well, what about a compassionate life? I mean, isn't there something to be said for that? And she sort of rears up and says, well, can't you be, passionate about compassion? Which she's trying to be. I mean, it's not just that she wants to be a woman in the throes of romance, although that becomes sort of a symptom of what happens to her, but she wants to take big, juicy bites out of life. And she doesn't feel that she has that in this leafy suburb of Princeton. Sister Eileen, on the other hand, she comes from not a hard scrabble background, but certainly a working class background on the Jersey Shore. She comes from a very Catholic family. That's what she wanted to do. She was going to be a nun. There was never any question about that. She felt that loving one person only would get in the way of her loving many people. And for her, it's all about how do we love, the dear neighbor without distinction, which is and there's the dog, which is the maxim of the Sisters of St. Joseph, that you come to the people, to the neighbor, not to those people, to your neighbor, these people, us, and you say, what do you need? And what you need is what I will try and get for you. Right. So it's very practical. It's not, it's not based in yes, but only if you believe in Jesus, right? Which I find one of the many remarkable things about this group of women. And I'm not Catholic. I'm certainly not Catholic. But I have an enormous respect for what they do. But whereas Angela is suffering from this lack of passion, Sister Rita is suffering with the silence of God. She feels that the God to whom she's devoted her existence, the heart of her vocation, has been silent for a long time. And she's also tormented by something that she did, rightly or wrongly, she's tormented by something that she did when she was much younger and has never really come to grips with. So they're both complicated. All people are complicated. Right? All people are complicated. We've all got these hidden nooks and crannies full of dust.
Indeed. Now let's open up the complicated people idea a little bit. The novel has been billed as you say, how to love difficult, challenging people. The few reviews that are out there have made note of it. Dundurn, your publisher, has made note of it. A wonderful thing happened of which you were a small part, and oddly enough, it was on Facebook. Facebook is pretty much useless. I only use it to keep track of 20 or 30 of my favorite writers. What are my people up to? Other than that, I could do without it. But the Canadian writer and critic Stephen Beattie, you might remember this, about 6 weeks ago, simply suggested that he is tired of what he calls the cult of likability. Mm-hmm. How come characters in novels have to be almost excused for being less than virtuous all the time?
Right. And think of the characters, the great characters, whether it's Madame Bovary or Raskolnikov or Humbert Humbert. Think of the amazing characters in literature we would not have if they had to be nice, likable people. I don't understand this. I've never understood this. I don't write Harlequin romances. There's a place for them, and if that's what people want to read, as long as you're reading, I'm happy to hear it. But those are not the books that interest me. The books that interest me are the ones that that rattle me a little bit, that shake me up. There's a book, I wish I could remember the name of the guy who wrote it. It's a South African, it's called Tsotsi, Tsotsi. They made a film about it as well. It's the only film I think I've ever said I think I like the ending better. However, the book is unbelievable. And it's about this kid from the townships who is absolutely heartless killer. And you see this early on. I mean, he's on the subway and there's a bunch of these guys like jackals around a commuter, and they just stick an ice pick in him very slowly and kill him. And you're going, oh my God. I mean, it could not be more horrific. How am I going to get through this? How am I going to read this book? He steals a car. In the back of the car, there's a baby. And his first instinct is, he hijacks the car, shoots the mother, and he's just going to leave the baby out for the jackals. But he doesn't. Something in him says, I'm not going to do that. And the rest of the book is, what is he going to do with this baby? And of course, you realize pretty quickly, the baby is the part of him that was alive before all the horrible things happened that made him into who he was today. And so it is in caring for this infant that the transformation, the unpeeling of the armor off this soul happens. If I had started reading this book and went, oh my God, that's a terrible character, I can't read that, I don't like him.
Right. That's it. And that's it.
And I would have missed out on one of the most extraordinary books on transformation I've ever read. So I grieve this idea that characters have to be likable. I grieve it because I think it detracts from the reader's experience completely. I think we're pandering to people when we only write books about pretty, happy, vanilla icing people. It doesn't work for me.
Where do you suppose this came from? Is it a modern thing? Is it the culture imposing itself on books? What do you think?
I mean, don't you think, David, that we see this less, frankly, in books that are published outside of the great big houses? I think it's about what the big houses think are going to be commercial blockbusters.
Okay, so this is a dollars and cents thing.
I think it's market. I think it's market driven, yep. and I think the problem with that is that it dilutes what literature is. I also think that I think it's a mistake. It's like when CBS, ABC, NBC used to think the only thing that people would watch on TV were shows, game shows and reality shows where people got plastic surgery. I remember that was going around for a while, right? And then all of a sudden, The Sopranos happened.
Exactly.
Not a lot of likable characters in there, under that, but there they were, these impossible to resist human beings in whom we saw ourselves, even if not all of ourselves, we saw these bits. And I've said elsewhere that I think when we engage with difficult characters, we are engaging with parts of ourselves, even if they may be shadowed or hidden sides of ourselves. That makes it useful.
Right.
Besides which, I really like these characters. I like messy characters. I like them. I would spend time with these people.
So Angela is, I don't know. I've read Even So 3 times, and I'm back and forth on the class issues, the gender issues involved here. Angela is difficult. She has things that could be better for her. She operates from a place of self-interest now and again. She has blind spots, etc., etc. In other words, she's a human being. But she is married to Philip. Let's talk about Philip for a sec. This guy is, well, less than.
Well, I think he is and he's not. I think I know a lot of
exactly.
I know a lot of guys like Philip, and man, are they trying hard. But they really are. I mean, these guys, they work hard. They live up to a model that's been presented to them. Their families mean something to them. Philip is not, he's not an unethical person. He's not robbing people. He's not, some fraudster out there. He's not a Bernie Madoff, right? He's doing a job that he does well. He's providing for a woman he loves. He adores his son. There's nothing really wrong with Philip. Maybe he could have had a wider life. He would know more things. He would have a different perspective if he was exposed to different sorts of people. But isn't that true of all of us?
And there it is, right? These are fully formed characters. And, not giving anything away, I've read all of your books, Lauren. I'm in for pretty much everything. But this book does something that, again, and you suggested it, a lot of books from a lot of the major houses simply don't. And they make individuals who are everything, who are good and bad, who are less than and virtuous. I couldn't decide, and I'm still not sure because I'm not unlike Philip, age, class, etc. Well, okay, not class, but I'm not sure about him as it relates to Angela. And it's a great book to puzzle over.
Well, I think that, unless somebody has been given an angel to wrestle with, it's hard to change, right? It's hard to change. And I think that's, this idea of the angel to wrestle with, this was given to me in conversation with my friend, Sister Rita, who is a sister of St. Joseph, and who I suspect is watching this somewhere. She talked about this idea of having an angel to wrestle with. And isn't it, aren't we more capable of transformation when we are in that sort of wrestling posture, which is an intimate posture, right? When Jacob is wrestling with the angel, this is a close in wrestle, I mean, this is not, two guys sitting across the table from each other and having an intellectual conversation. This is a wrestle. You are being twisted into all sorts of shapes you would not ordinarily be twisted into. You wouldn't find yourself in those positions, and it leaves scars. Jacob has that reminder on his thigh for the rest of his life, right? Because you have been transformed by this thing. And that to me, and sometimes that thing is ourselves, right? I'll quickly tell you a story about some of my own blind spots, and we've all got them, right? This is what I find fascinating. What's your blind spot? How did you get it? As Trenton that we've mentioned, Trenton, a lot of drugs that are dealt in Trenton. And so as a result, all of the streets are one-way streets. And because the police don't want kids from Princeton, say, being able to drive in, pick up their drugs and drive out again, right? So they want you to have to go on this labyrinthian tour of Trenton. And I get lost all the time. One day when I was down there driving somebody at the soup kitchen, there was somebody in terrible shape who needed a lift home rather than take 2 buses in the middle of winter. So I said, I'm happy to drive you home, but somebody's got to come with me because I'll never find my way out again because it's just those streets. And I only learned to drive when I was 50, so I'm not good at this. So sure enough, another woman hopped in the car. She said, great. So off we go. We dropped this woman off at this, at her apartment building, which is in, quite frankly, looks a bit like downtown Beirut. I mean, it's pretty rough. So as soon as we pull out, the car is surrounded by drug dealers, because now we're just two white women in a Volvo. And there is no reason for us to be there except to buy drugs, right? So I'm, having taught in prison for quite a while, I am not terribly intimidated by this. In fact, I think it's kind of funny. So I roll down the window and I'm laughing. I said, look, guys, I really appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit, but yeah, no, not today. Right. So one of the guys sort of got up and he said, well, what the F are you doing here then? And I said, well, I just dropped off so-and-so. He said, oh, you know her? I said, yeah, well, know her. He said, okay, great. Okay, get off the car. And off we went. So a few weeks later, my husband had to drive down to Trenton to do something, because it's the state capital, right? So anything you have to do document wise as Canadians, you've got to do there. So he went off by himself to do that. He came back and I said, how did it go? Because he had kind of a funny look in his face. And I said, did you get lost? And he said, oh yeah. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, there were a couple of guys, sitting drinking out of a paper bag on a stoop. And, so I said, excuse me, but, I'm lost. And so, they started coming over to the car, but I don't know, I got nervous and I just, I said, oh, thanks very much. And rolled up the window and went on. And I, sort of stood back and I said, well, do you think if they'd been white, you would have had a different response? And my husband looked at me and went, what are you talking about? They were white. And it was like, oh my God, was that me? And it's like, yeah, that was me. I made these assumptions about what was going on in Trenton, and because those are the stories that I'd heard about Trenton. Trenton's an all-black city. It's very dangerous. Don't talk to people there. So that's where my mind went. And I try to work really hard at this stuff. So, all I can do is I can do two things when something like that happens. One, laugh like hell. And two, don't do that again. All right. But again, that became an angel for me to wrestle with. And so Angela ends up with her angels to wrestle with, right? She finds an opportunity to have this sort of passionate relationship and possibly partner that she dreams that she has always wanted. Karsten, in our glacier-eyed Dane. And, what is she bringing to that? Well, she's bringing her certain assumptions about what that relationship is going to be. And for better or worse, some of those assumptions are not met. And so, again, Karsten becomes this angel. In the meantime, for Eileen, Angela becomes the angel. Because in order for Eileen to understand, I think, what love as a transformational tool, what love used for mutual healing, not just for one, but for both people involved. She has to learn to love Angela, even though Angela is driving her out of her mind. Right? Angela is careless, she's reckless, she's narcissistic, she's caught up in this distorted thinking, and yet she is presented to end.
Yeah, there's something there. Yeah.
There's something there.
And Eileen is, in what ways, it sounds like you've done a hell of a lot of work in the area of faith and of the application of faith. Was Eileen a fairly easy character to get on the first draft, or did that take a while? Did it have to percolate in your head?
I was really lucky. First of all, there were a group of nuns at a retreat center who let me come and stay with them for a while. These women just amazed me. I mean, with one exception, like two exceptions, they were all, in some cases, significantly older than I. These women are up at 5 o'clock in the morning. They start working. They do not, and I mean physical work. They do not stop working until 9 o'clock at night, 10 o'clock at night. They wore me out. And everything they're doing, I said to them, I was starting conversations with them while we were washing, scrubbing out pots and doing all this stuff. And I realized at one point that they were being a little kind to me. I, you know, so I thought, you know, I don't usually seem to be talking a lot while they're doing this. And one of the sisters explained to me that they're praying over the pots and pans, that the pots and pans may serve food that is nourishing to the people in this conference center who've come there for healing and for retreat. When they're scrubbing the bathrooms, they're doing the same thing. When they're cooking, you know, when they're serving the meals. And I thought, wow, to be that constantly present in service to someone else, you know, I have an awful lot of respect for that. So, you know, you know, as I say, I wasn't raised Catholic. I'm not a Catholic. So trying to get the theological stance of a Catholic nun was not easy. And, you know, thank God for generous people like Sister Rita and others who let me grill them and ask stupid questions, and who read parts of the manuscript over. So, you know, to make sure that I didn't make a complete fool of myself and misrepresent them. Right. And one of the things that I also talked about was the idea of clerical abuse. And, you know, I can't write a book about the Catholic Church without at least addressing that. And the truth is that I know sisters who were sexually abused by priests as children. And in one case, it was a member of her family who sort of pimped her out to the priests. And I asked her at one point in our relationship, so given all of that horror, why Catholicism? And she said, because I'm not going to let those bastards take my faith from me.
And sure, yeah.
And that really meant a lot to me. And I think one of the things that people will notice in the book is that it is grounded, I think, in the spirituality, as best as I could do it, of the Sisters of St. Joseph. But there is a real lack of the papacy and the male institutional hierarchy of the church. And that was a choice I made, because what I know of these women, the work they do is within the, I'm not going to say the bubble, but within the framework of their vocation to their neighbors. And
Sure.
they're sure that the Vatican is doing lovely things wherever it is, but this is what they're doing, and that's where their focus is. And again, it's that, you know, in Native tradition, you know, I have an elder I knew, Betty Pam, and she used to talk about women's medicine being water. And, you know, that you know, male energy is a little different, but women's energy is water. And that's where women's medicine comes from. It just keeps going. It keeps flowing. It moves around. It wears down very slowly. But of course, we all know that water will dig a pretty deep trench left to its own power. And that was the sort of faith tradition I was trying to grapple with. I mean, this is also, you know, Sister Rita is the woman who said to me when I said, I don't think churches are for me. She said, well, where is the sacred for you? And I said, oh, pretty much in the back garden. And she said, well, then go there, you know, go where God is. And that is it's such a sensible way of looking at faith. So grounded, so rooted, you know, such an earthy sort of faith that I really fell in love with it. And I fell in love with these women, and I wanted to do them justice.
Nice, thank you. Faith and the big stuff that is in a novel, or that should be in a novel worth spending time with: faith, class, agency. There's very little abstraction in Even So. This is all real, as you say, elemental. It's water and dirt and earth and sweat. The idea of class as a motivator here. Angela, throughout much of the novel, it was almost like a horror film in a lot of ways. You were, you know, screaming at Angela, don't open the door, don't do that, don't make that turn there. Oh God, it's going to,
only a
don't do that. Yeah. And I was struck repeatedly by a character in one of your earlier novels, The Empty Room, Colleen Kerrigan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
now she had.
I think there is some of Colleen in Angela. It's a different addiction, right? I mean, Colleen was addicted to
Bingo.
alcohol, but there is such a thing as being addicted to drama and to passion and to excitement. And I'm not talking about sexual addiction, right? That's something that's something completely different. But to be unable to sit. You know, years ago, I was listening to a woman who was a Holocaust survivor, and she talked about the incredible blessing of being able to sit quietly in a still room. You know, and I think that sort of reaction to stillness, to peace, to quiet, to a smaller life, if you will, rather than one that's played out in, you know, in great sweeps of drama. I think some people are sort of born with a natural affinity for it, but I think others are brought to it through experience, through life experience. And I've seen this, you know, I've seen this happen with people who've been through trauma or of one kind or another. You know, years ago, I was at I'm not telling any tales out of school here. I was at an AA meeting in London, England. And because that's the kind of jet-setting drunk I was. But I was in an AA meeting in London, and there was a young man there who had done a hard time. He had shot somebody to death during a violent robbery, jewelry store robbery. And he got sober in prison, which frankly, you know, you don't have to do. You can stay pretty drunk in prison if you want to, but he did get sober in prison. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's this thing called the fourth step, where you have to make an inventory of your faults and the things you've done to harm people. And then you have to, in your fifth step, tell somebody about this, a fearless moral inventory, it's called. And he had to make his fearless moral inventory to a bunch of guys who were going to be there for life. So they didn't care whether he ever got out or not. They didn't, you know, they were not leaving the prison, right? But if he ever wanted to be up for parole or parole, he would have to get through them first. Right? That was the deal. And they wouldn't let him bullshit them, right? You know, he would start saying something about what he'd done, and they went, no, man, not that's not honest. That's not honest. Go back. Until they got him to a place where he talked about this, where he had to admit to himself not only what he had done, which he was fully aware of that, he took full accountability for that, but that he was always going to be someone capable of doing that. That there was none of this, now I'm changed, and I'm, you know, and I'm, you know, I found Jesus and it's all going to be marvelous. No, this was a person who was going to spend the rest of his life making amends. And when he got out of prison, which he did, he learned to weld while he was in prison. And he got a very good high-paying job as a welder. They make good money. He went to a lawyer, and through the lawyer, because he didn't know whether the widow would ever want to hear from him again, he had the lawyer approach her, and the lion's share by far of his salary for the rest of his life will go to her and her children, and help with their education, all the rest of that, because that's what he felt was the appropriate response. And I thought, that's the kind of transformation that comes not only when we are accountable, accept accountability for what we do. It's so liberating. It's so liberating to do that. And that's what I wanted these women to find. I wanted them to find a sort of liberation from their own egos.
Sure.
And somebody called it a fairy tale in reverse. And
okay, I can see that.
That's kind of interesting. We won't give it, we won't talk it too much about what happens in the book towards the end, but I think that's sort of an interesting phrase to keep in mind.
That should be on the jacket. That's when it goes into a second printing, maybe when it goes into a reprint, that's not a bad idea. And you have, and thank you. You have answered the final question I have here. We're going to throw it to Q&A in a sec, but I'm going to go back to Empty Room for a second. I was again struck by the review in the Toronto Star, which reads in part, Davis offers a completely believable picture of one woman's decline and helplessness. She makes us feel we are inside Colleen's skin, guaranteeing our empathy. Guaranteeing our empathy.
I don't know whether any writer can guarantee a reader's empathy.
That is exactly my question. Are writers able? Are writers better able to do that? And what does that mean?
I think we can open our veins on the page and do everything we can to try and elicit it. But the reader's got to come to you. I mean, the reader has to do their job as well. And not all readers, look, not all books are for all people, right? And
sure.
I understand not all books, there have been books that have done massively well and won all kinds of awards, and I've read them, and maybe it's just the mood I'm in, but I was left cold for one reason or another. So I don't think you can guarantee empathy, but I think it should be what you strive for. I'm there are a number of writers, we're not going to name them, who I think when I read their work, I think, oh my God, that's so clever. Oh my gosh, they're so smart, so clever. But I remain unmoved. I'm impressed, but not moved. And for me, the best reading experiences are the ones that move me, right? And have me pondering afterwards.
Last question, Lauren. How's it been so far? You've been with a couple of different publishers, and we touched on big houses earlier. Dundurn is a small-ish and growing publisher out of Toronto. They have made great strides in the last few years to diversify their list, to put a little more punk rock in it. They're now doing a much wider, much more diverse. They put a much wider, much more diverse list together.
Yeah, I think Scott Fraser's got a really great vision for this press, and I'm
he really does
about it, because I think it's going to open doors not only for writers of all different ilk, writers who may not have had a voice, but also for works that may not find a voice, and that I think are really going to respond to readers. I think readers get a bit bored with the same sort of, it's like sometimes you read books that come out of MFA programs and you think, this is just like almost, you can tell they've come out of an MFA program, because it's kind of a group. You can see them think, especially I think if you are a writer, and then you get a books like what was the book that knocked me out this year? Jenny Erpenpeck's The End of Things. Have you read this?
I confess I have not.
Oh my God, go and get this book. It's so extraordinary. She's a German writer. And what I love about this book is I was talking about this to somebody else recently. What I love about it is it's so obviously not written to be a movie. Dare I say that? If you're going to make a movie of every sort, it's fine with me. But
someone should say it.
but it's so obviously a novel that is deeply in love with the novel form. And I'm thrilled with this book. Just so that's sort of the book I'm flogging this year. I think it's absolutely extraordinary. But I do think that what Dundurn's vision is, I think it's really meaningful. I think we're going to see more and more interesting books come out of Dundurn. And I'm hopeful they're going to publish another one of mine one day. I would be very happy to publish with them again.
Scott, if you're listening, good sir. Well, ... there are one or two questions / comments in the Q&A portion of things here. Heidi asks, Lauren, you have two equally strong female characters, both with strengths and struggles of their own. In the process of writing, did you find that either seemed to have a stronger voice? How did you balance them as you wrote the book?
Yeah, it's a good question. Heidi should know, because she's a terrific writer herself. She wrote, oh my God, it's going to go right out of my head. Heidi, you're going to kill me. Two Jacks and the One-Eyed Queen.
Nice recovery.
Thank you very much. Terrific book. And in fact, it's because of Heidi that I met Dundurn.
Oh, really?
She suggested that I send it to an editor there, and I had not thought of them because I've been out of Canada and wasn't aware of what they were doing, and so thank you very much, Heidi. So the two female voices, you know, I know these women so well. You know, by the time I got into the writing of it, you know, I always say that I get about 100 pages in and I get an end scene that flashes into my head. So I know what the emotional resonance is that I'm aiming for. So by the time I got there, I knew these two women. And so it was not difficult to write. And I write chronologically. I'm terrible. I don't storyboard. Maybe I should, but I don't write out outlines. I write chronologically. So I would write Sister Eileen's part, and I would, you know, then I would write Angela's part, and then Sister Eileen's and Angela's part, and that's just the way I work. So they were always in balance for me, because I was having conversations with them both.
Sure. Susan Applewhite
she gave us the name
that
to the Tootsie book.
We got the name. We got the name.
Thanks, Susan.
Atoll Fugard.
Yeah, yeah.
Which,
highly recommended book. And
nice.
then see the movie because the ending's different. It's interesting. We'll talk.
Okay. How many different to pick up on Heidi's question around balancing two of the main characters, both with a lot of heft, a lot of weight, a lot of things to talk about.
One of the choices I had to make, and I think this is a choice all writers have to make fairly early on, is what point of view are you going to use? Because at one point I had started out in the first person. Each of them would have their own voice. I did this, I did that, I did the other thing. And interestingly enough, I found that distanced me from them, because I didn't feel, oddly, as though I was in their heads the same way. When I was writing through what they call free indirect discourse, or a close third person, you know, it's still he or she or they, but even though you use those pronouns, the perspective, the psychic distance is very close in. So there is no seam between what the characters are thinking often in the narrative sections and what the author is telling you. Right. So it's all in the context of the reading that you understand where a particular character is having a flight of fancy when you're in their thoughts rather than in a descriptive passage. And it's a tricky point of view to use, because to maintain it throughout, you always have to have this sort of the two-headed balance, right? Indeed. But for me, I've always found it's the most intimate of all of the points of view. Stream of consciousness, I think, is so intimate as not to be understandable sometimes. I think it's great for passages in a book, but not necessarily for an entire book. I find myself, I don't know where we are. So that's one of the reasons, I think, why the characters were in balance and why they felt fairly easy to write for me. And not easy to write, you know what I mean, but easy to stay in one or the other.
It works very well. That idea it lends itself very well to character development and conflict. On page 69 of the book, after and again, not giving too much away, Angela and Philip have one of their last big blowouts, one of their last big scratch and claw arguments. Philip suggests at the end of Angela's screed around, well, you just want this and this and this. Philip says very calmly, no, Angela, I just want my wife back. The next sentence is very simply, a good person would have responded to the pain in that. It opens up a huge other room.
Well, I think it's
Nicely done.
thank you. I think it's one of the first moments when we think, oh my God, Angela has
Exactly. Exactly.
Right?
This is where everything speeds up and then moves around everywhere after that.
Well, she's made a choice there, hasn't she? Right.
Exactly.
You know, she's recognized that in fact she has not been a very nice person. And she has done things that a nice person would not do. And yet she, you know, like a drunk who knows they're an alcoholic but isn't willing to put down the bottle yet. She's not willing to put down those passions yet.
And again, on the other side, Sister Eileen has to carry around all of her past and has made a conscious choice to actively let it go.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a huge amount of what a huge canvas for two people.
Well, I think all people's canvases are huge, David. I mean, if if we could flip over in each other's heads and really see what's going on in there. I mean, one, I think would be horrified. But the other thing is, I think that that we couldn't help but be filled with like an almost crippling compassion for how much people drag around with them, and especially the things they don't need. Because I think part of what happens with Angela, when you say, as you say, the reader is going, oh, for God's sake, don't do that, right? is because, you know, we often can see things about somebody that they can't see themselves. And yet sometimes the only thing in life that is going to peel away those layers are the difficult things you have to go through. And, you know, I'm no Pollyanna about it. Not everybody survives it. Right. You know, in my own family, as I think you know, both my brothers committed suicide. Not everybody survives. And I think part of it, and this is, I think, part of what Angela comes to, is that level of humility that allows her not only to take responsibility for what she has done and to see herself as she is, but also to take all those rocks she's been carrying around and just put them down so that she can walk on in a very different life, but without the burden of trying to prove herself all the time, to cling to. And in Eileen's case, I think it's, you know, you put down the guilt just so God can love you. You know, and it's no, that's wrong, because it's not because God is already loving you. It's just so you know that whatever God is, right? And let's not get into that discussion here. But whatever
Sure.
is, that's probably not what it is, because if you can think of it, then, you know, it's probably much bigger than that. But whatever that sacred thing is, to get out of your own way, even of your own guilt, to see that you are beloved, as you know, as Raymond Carver says, to know yourself beloved on this earth. That has so much more to do with letting go than it does grasping on to things, I think.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that it is probably the perfect place to leave this. If there are questions, now's the time. We still have a couple of minutes. But what happens now, Lauren? Have you got virtual events lined up? I know you're in Grimsby.
I'm doing a few book clubs. I'd love to do book clubs. If anybody's out there and they've got a book club and they would like me to show up, I am virtually available for those things. Let me know. You can do so through my website. I've got Word on the Street coming up. I'm in conversation with Deborah Dundas from the Toronto Star. Then what else am I doing? Oh my gosh. I'm doing Blue Heron, the book
nice
series, which just cracks me up. I mean, is it better titled for me or what? And I'm doing the Grimsby Radio is having me on. I think it's October 24th. If you go to my website, there's an events page, and you can you can see all that stuff. And I've got some teaching gigs too, so if anybody would like to pop onto those, they're always fun. Oh, I see Paul
Outstanding.
asking a question.
What do we got here?
Oh, she says it's
Holly
Holly Hogan.
said-
Holly Hogan. Okay, I get to tell everybody
Yep.
that Holly Hogan is Michael Crummey's wife, and one of the writers I most admire in
Oh, my.
Canada is Michael Crummey. Hi, Holly. Say give my love to Michael. Thank you. Say she says she liked
Holly.
the conversation and she's ordered her book, which I like, makes me happy.
Nice one, Holly. I think that has got it. Lauren, nicely done.
Thank
The
you
book is
so much,
first rate.
David. It's always a pleasure talking to you. I wish we could have been there in person, but this is fun. Oh, wait a minute. My dog wants the final word. Come here. Do you want to come up and say hello? Come say hello to all the persons. There we go.
Haley, the floor is yours.
All the persons. There we go. He goes, where's my dinner? I want more food. Thank you so much, David. Thank you to Waterloo Library.
Thank you.
As I see you, I know. And hopefully we'll talk in person soon one of these days.
Indeed. Nancy, thank you very much. Thank you indeed for the Waterloo Public Library. In a couple of days for our assembled party, I will be speaking with, well, not speaking with, really, I'll be listening to Terry Follis. The new book is Operation Angus. Terry is a lovely fellow. It will be hard to keep him within the hour. Once he starts talking, he, tends not to stop, but it's all very much worth listening to and being a part of. Operation Angus is out. We will be speaking, the Waterloo Public Library and Wordsworth Books have put together an event with Terry on Thursday. Folks, thank you very much. Lauren, nicely done.
Everybody. Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, David, for partnering with us in this event. Thank you, Lauren, for coming out for the conversation. Yes, it would have been great in person, but it's also fantastic that in times like these that we're able to come together virtually as well. Even so, you can order it at Wordsworth Books or put your name it on the holds list at wpl.ca. I see that there's a bunch I can actually see right now that we have some holds on it. So Wordsworth Books, Wordsworth Books if you would like to purchase, and the wpl.ca if you'd like to add your name to our holds list. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and everyone take care.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
Bye.
Thank you all. Good night.